Everyone, this is Ari, and welcome back. I'm here with Dr. Bryan Walsh, who is an expert on the subject of adrenal fatigue, and he's done a lot of work debunking a lot of myths in this area and kind of helping to shed light on what the true underlying factors are in adrenal fatigue. So I'm a huge fan of his work. I've also purchased his course, Metabolic Fitness Pro, which I'm also a big fan of. Super smart guy, and I'm honored to be interviewing him. So I'm excited to share him with you. So welcome, Dr. Bryan Walsh.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So can you just tell everybody a little bit about your background and kind of what got you into this field and your origins?
Yeah, I'll try to keep it short. When you asked that question, it made me go back a little further. I started out, I've always been interested in the human body. I remember pre-teen, actually, asking my mom for money to order a nutrition book in the mail, and would read this thing when she would drive me around. It was too early to even drive. I've always been interested in nutrition and how the body works. I started out as a fitness professional, quite honestly. And then I added to that being a massage therapist. I was really interested in orthopedic work as it pertained to being a fitness professional. And what I found was a bunch of people were asking, as probably that happens with you, asking me about nutrition and supplements and all these things that were technically outside of my scope at the time. You know, I was kind of a law-abiding citizen, and as a fitness professional and a massage therapist out in California, I didn't feel like I knew a lot about nutrition, but I was a little afraid legally. And so I became a naturopathic physician. It was a 4-year school, and for those that don't know, a naturopathic doctor or naturopathic physician is essentially a doctor of natural medicine. And it's this huge umbrella. We learned chiropractic adjustments, acupuncture, botanical medicine, nutrition courses, all the sciences too, of course. The first 2 years were mostly completely science. We learned, we learned drugs and how they're used in doses and diagnosis. And so anyways, that was this huge umbrella for which everything fell underneath. We even learned, physical therapy modalities. Wow. And that was kind of my calling, because then I could talk to anybody about anything legally. And so since then, I think the short version is integrative medicine and conventional medicine both do things very right and very wrong. And what I try to do, in short, in summary, is bridge the best of both worlds. What conventional medicine does really well is science. We owe what we know about the human body and how it works to Western medicine, honestly, and Western science. On the other hand, conventional medicine sucks at finding things like, or even acknowledging things like intestinal permeability, or that low cortisol is real and it's not just Addison's disease, or candida, or all these things that are very real. People are suffering because of them, but they don't look for them. Yeah. Integrative medicine, on the other hand, doesn't really appreciate science as well as I think that they should, as a whole. They are great at finding and considering food sensitivities, heavy metal toxicity, candida, all the things that I just mentioned, but they will overlook things like cancer. And they'll do the fancy cool tests and not even look for, diabetes, for example. So I try to combine the best of both. They both offer some amazing stuff. They both kind of suck at some things. I suck at a lot of things, honestly, but I try to bring the best of what they both offer, because it's not polar opposites. It's not the yin and the yang, man. We're trying to achieve the same thing, just in different ways. And so as much as I can, I try to bring those together.
Nice. Really well explained. I like that a lot. So let's get into the meat of it. Let's talk about adrenal fatigue. And I know that this field has kind of undergone a lot of evolution of thought over the last decade or two. And originally James Wilson came out with this idea of adrenal fatigue, and then we had Hans Selye's kind of model of the alarm stage and the exhaustion stage and all that. Can you talk a little bit about what the old model of adrenal fatigue is, and And then maybe we'll kind of segue into what the new model looks like.
Yeah. I think, Hans Selye was really the one who started it. And the work that he did, and James Wilson was, I think that was probably in the 80s when he did his. So Hans Selye was much, 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 much older. And essentially what he did was he coined, I'll tell you this, he brought forth the knowledge that we have about adrenal physiology in ways that we just hadn't known prior to his work, quite honestly. And what he did was he created, based on his experiments with lab mice and lab rats, he created sort of this paradigm of the mammalian, because he wasn't studying it on humans, stress response. And, the way that he would sometimes stress them out was, to have them swim until they couldn't swim anymore, or the variety of ways of stressing out mice, apparently. But he would stress them out, and what he would find is from baseline levels of cortisol was the primary hormone that he was interested in, that they would have this initial stress response, and he called it the alarm phase. And then if the stress continued, then the alarm phase would sort of come down, and cortisol levels might come down and might be back to the normal range. But then he would call that the resistance phase, where the body was still under a stressful situation and it wasn't responding the same way. And then if the stress continued, cortisol may go quite low, and then he called that the exhaustion phase, and that where they did not have the stress reserves that they did before. And again, Hans Selye is still quoted so often, especially in the alternative medicine space. And this whole paradigm that he talks about it's almost dogma, and it's great. I mean, we owe a great debt of gratitude for his work, quite honestly. But there was a paper by the guy that wrote the Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers book, Sapolsky. The guy's brilliant. That guy is he's phenomenal. Yeah. But he co-authored a recent paper. And they expressly stated, and this has been stated other places as well, that Hans Selye taught us what we know or knew about glucocorticoids or cortisol or adrenal function, but based on modern science, and used the phrase "profound." He was profoundly wrong in terms of the things, and that's not uncommon. For science to not prove anything new, but disprove what we previously believed. I joke around about it, but I'm still kind of devastated that Pluto's no longer a planet, because for years that's what I believed and that's what I was taught, and then all of a sudden they said, "Oh no, we're not. It's not a planet." I'm like, how could you take the planet label away from a planet? But that just proves that we know something, we believe something, and then we just disprove it. We don't prove something new. Yeah. And so what basically all this stuff and the dogma that Selye proposed, or is used as dogma now, is still quite present, as you know. And this whole model of adrenal fatigue, and that when, like James Wilson said, if somebody has low cortisol, which I'll go on record as saying is absolutely true, people can have low cortisol. It's not an autoimmune condition. It's not pathology per se. They feel horrible. It sucks. I mean, they're often depressed. There's some interesting studies on low cortisol and depression and mood disorders, PTSD. They have increased pain sensitivity. They have hypoglycemic tendencies. They can't sleep. When they do wake up, they can't even hit the snooze button. They don't feel rested. They don't feel recovered. It sucks. It's real. That's real. But the causes of it aren't. And this whole concept of adrenal fatigue that is going around is saying, well, your adrenal, and listen, let me just quickly say too, I learned adrenal fatigue. I talk to my patients about adrenal fatigue. I even probably created a couple of videos online, 10 years ago about adrenal fatigue, and I'm embarrassed by it because I was taught I was teaching what I was taught, which was wrong. I shouldn't have done that.
Yeah, I should have looked and me and 1,000 other people all do
Well,
that.
Yeah, because you learn it and you're like, well, that's cool. It makes sense. Let me talk about it with people. And I would see low cortisol and I would say this is adrenal fatigue. And the concept is that your adrenal glands are tired, they're worn out, they're shriveled up, and they can't make cortisol anymore. So you can see low cortisol in somebody on a test, and the explanation is, oh, you have been under stress for a very long time. And I would have patients be like, well, I don't feel stressed out at all. Like, well, listen, you have to be. Your test is telling me that not only are you stressed now, but this stress has been going on for a very long time because your adrenal glands are worn out. Right. And that's the story of adrenal fatigue. But, and I'm sure you have plenty of questions, but one of the first questions is, why is there not fatigue of any other organ? Why is there not? So in type 1 diabetics and late stage type 2 diabetics, the pancreas no longer makes insulin. Why is that now called pancreatic fatigue? Yeah. Why is testicular hypogonadism, the testes don't make testosterone well anymore, called testicular fatigue? Or ovarian fatigue, or pituitary fatigue, or thyroid fatigue, or there's no such thing anywhere in medicine, anywhere, but yet these adrenal glands are these poor scapegoats of, oh, they're worn out, they're tired, you've been stressed for a long time. And the thing is the science proves that no, that's wrong. That Selye's model is incorrect. That he used the phrase profoundly wrong when Sapolsky wrote that article. Yeah. And the science says otherwise, but yet we still perpetuate this thing. And I can't tell you how many patients, literally a week, probably in the neighborhood of 5 or so, that will contact me saying, I was either diagnosed with adrenal fatigue by another practitioner, or I'm pretty sure I have it. Can you help me with my adrenal fatigue? Oh, yeah. I'm like, no, because you don't have adrenal fatigue. It's not real.
Yeah, I mean, I feel it's become a catch-all diagnosis where anytime somebody's complaining of being tired, there's just a million alternative practitioners out there that are like, oh, it's adrenal fatigue, before they've even done any diagnostic tests. And whether you have high cortisol or whether it's low cortisol, they're like, oh, it's adrenal fatigue.
Yeah.
The adrenals, like you said, have become this scapegoat for
look at the symptoms, though. So mild depression, inability to concentrate, brain fog, pain, tired, food cravings for salt, cravings for sugar. I'm like, well, what condition doesn't have those things? I mean, those are really diffuse symptoms that could also vaguely be hypothyroidism, or be, and this is a catch-all too, but chronic fatigue or fibromyalgia, or all these different things, and different autoimmune conditions. Candida fits a lot of those symptom profiles too. So it has been a catch-all sort of wastebasket diagnosis for a lot of people. And the other thing is too, is people be like, I'm stressed. Wow, my adrenal glands are probably shot. Yeah, I have no idea. Yeah. You could be stressed and they could be high. I could be stressed and it could be normal. Someone else could be stressed or not stressed and they're low. It has nothing to do. Your perceived stress level has nothing to do with what your adrenal glands are actually doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So the old model, Hans Selye's model, James Wilson's model of the adrenal glands sort of getting stressed out and worn out and fatigued, and so they can't produce enough cortisol. So that's profoundly wrong. What does the new model look like?
Well, there's not any one place that I think that describes a new model, quite honestly. And my story with this is I wasn't satisfied with my education. I wasn't satisfied with what I learned and had been taught. And it started with blood chemistry. But then it's since I started learning about blood chemistry and the markers and where they come from and what they mean, and then I haven't stopped. I just kept, and then I would actually, I try to reach a dead end or I'd get bored with the topic, and then I'd say, all right, well, what else have I been taught that I should question? And adrenal fatigue came up. Vitamin D supplementation has come up. Gluten sensitivity has come up. SIBO's come up. All these different things. But that's how it started. And I just started reading the literature. I started looking at, what real adrenal physiology is and what the modern scientific literature says about it. And so I can tell you, and I don't take credit for anything. So I would hate for someone to call this like the Walsh protocol or the Walsh model of adrenal something rather. This is I've just picked through the literature a lot and come up with a couple things that I believe what low cortisol is. So I'll say this again, low cortisol in patients is real. It does not have to be an autoimmune condition, and they suffer from these symptoms. The two things that it could be one, the other, or both, is number one, is what I'm going to call a functional adrenal insufficiency. Now, I say functional because conventional medicine says adrenal insufficiency. That's when the adrenal glands can't make cortisol. But they don't consider some of the reasons the functional reasons for this. It's always some pathological condition. So functional adrenal insufficiency is an adrenal gland that is unable to make cortisol for some reason. Now, someone may say that that sounds just the same as adrenal fatigue. The adrenal glands aren't wiped out. They're not tired. They're not overly taxed. There's a reason why they're not producing cortisol. And in this model, functional adrenal insufficiency, it could be things like mitochondrial dysfunction. So to put it very simplistically, I don't know the education level of your listeners, but inside the cell, there's a mitochondria. Now, this is like high school biology for most people. The powerhouse of the cell makes ATP. But what needs to be known is first of all, there's like this phrase or concept called adrenal dysfunction right now, and it's conventional medicine is all over this too. This is real. The mitochondria, this is really fascinating. The mitochondria takes cholesterol, everybody knows cholesterol, in the adrenal gland, cholesterol into the mitochondria, and the first step to turn cholesterol into cortisol occurs inside the mitochondria, into pregnenolone. When that happens, pregnenolone leaves the mitochondria, heads over to this thing called the endoplasmic reticulum, does a few other enzymatic changes. The byproduct that heads back to the mitochondria, and then the last step turns it into cortisol, and then it's released. So if nobody followed that whole thing, the bottom line is you have to have healthy mitochondria to make cortisol.
Yeah.
And there's this concept called mitochondrial dysfunction, which is very real. There's also something called endoplasmic reticulum stress, which is another organelle dysfunction, and that too is very real. And turns out mitochondria and endoplasmic reticulum tend to hang out really, really close to each other inside of cells. So if you have one dysfunction, you tend to have both.
Yeah.
But so if someone has too much oxidative stress, free radicals, mitochondrial dysfunction, this is too much to explain, but NADPH deficiency, things inside the cell that are not working properly, you can't make optimal amounts of cortisol. Another big one today, and I have no idea how much this is actually impacting people, is the exposure to certain toxic chemicals. That certain toxic chemicals are absolutely known to inhibit every single enzyme in turning cholesterol into cortisol, and to any of the sex hormones, estrogen, testosterone, doesn't matter. But you can find a list of like 15 common different things, from heavy metals to pesticides, fungicides, and even some pharmaceutical medications that block, I'll just mention the enzyme 3-beta-hydroxysteroid dehydrogenase, which is one of the many enzymes to turn cholesterol into cortisol. Arsenic, phthalates, TCBs, dioxins, they all block this enzyme. So if you have exposure to these things, you may not be making cortisol, not because your adrenal glands are tired or wiped out or you've been stressed for a really long time. It could be too much oxidative stress. It could be the mitochondria aren't working properly, or combination. It could be nutrient deficiency, that just to run the processes inside the mitochondria without, and I'll go into as much detail of this as you want.
You're doing great.
But the processes inside the mitochondria just to function properly. People are familiar with the Krebs cycle. Maybe you've heard of the electron transport chain. The amount of nutrients, and when I say nutrients, I mean vitamins and minerals, required to run those processes is intense. There's so many different nutrients that if you're deficient in some of these nutrients, the mitochondria doesn't work. If you have too many oxidative stress or free radicals, the mitochondria doesn't work. If you have certain toxic exposures, you can't turn cholesterol into cortisol. So this is all under that heading of what I would call a functional adrenal insufficiency. Yeah. That you're not making cortisol, and it's for some not pathology, not disease process, but nutrient deficiency, too much oxidative stress, mitochondrial, something inside the adrenal glands where if provided, they would be able to make cortisol, but they're not. It's not fatigue. It's not they're too tired. They're not shriveled up. And it certainly doesn't take 2 years to rebuild the adrenal glands, which I've heard some educators teach other practitioners, which is just bogus. It's just totally wrong. Yeah. Give them the right nutrients. If that was the problem, they'll start making cortisol in a couple of weeks. I mean, so that's one of them.
Okay, so let me just recap for everybody,
please.
To give the overarching paradigm. So low cortisol is real.
Totally.
And the issue with the adrenals not being able to pump out enough cortisol is a real problem that manifests in very real symptoms. The issue is it's not coming from them being fatigued from stress and not being able to do it. It's these other causes that are inhibiting them from.
I will tell you, it may have nothing to do with stress at all. Under that premise, when you think about it, it may have nothing to do with stress. Nutrient deficiency has nothing to do with stress. That's just maybe not eating the right foods, multivitamins, the poor soils, they're not digesting, absorbing them. It has nothing to do with being chronically stressed. I won't get into this. To make cortisol, you make a lot of reactive oxygen species or free radicals in the process. Theoretically, someone could have been under a considerable stress, making a lot of cortisol, but therefore creating a lot of free radicals, which then damage the cell, damage the mitochondria, if that makes sense. So technically that could be accurate. But no, very few of those things have anything, it may not be due to stress.
Gotcha. Okay.
Toxin exposure is not due to stress. You're not stressed out.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're
on that note, I actually recall a really interesting study that you had posted. I saw on your Facebook maybe a month or two ago. I think it was done in rats, and they were showing that glyphosate was inhibiting cortisol production.
Yeah.
You were kind of like, well, is it, the adrenal glands getting fatigued and worn out from stress, or is it, just that you have this toxin that's preventing the adrenals from producing cortisol?
Yeah, and here's the point. If you haven't had a chance to actually read that study, here was the really potent. So that's one thing. So that Roundup might be causing this low cortisol in people. But here's the thing, man. This is the real kicker about that study. Was that at doses far below what the EPA and I think the World Health Organization considered to be it's known as an endocrine disruptor. When we think of endocrine disruption, we think of estrogen and testosterone and the sex hormones. Mm-hmm. But at a level well below that causes issues with those other hormones, it was causing cortisol suppression.
Oh,
and
wow.
So what this study was basically saying is small amounts of this, well under the radar of what people consider to be safe, is causing cortisol suppression in rats. But then my question was, well, with the exposure that we're getting, I mean, I live in sort of farm country. Who knows what the farmers around me are, and we have well water. Like, who knows what people are spreading? Am I getting small amounts of this stuff? Who knows? And at levels far below what's considered to be safe by government agencies. So that's what was really compelling about it. And it's the only study that was so happy to find that. It was the only study that I know of that's looked at that. It's pretty scary stuff. But anyhow.
Yeah, I'm sure. Interesting. So on that note, I don't want to digress too much, but there's one thing that I see skeptics, like science skeptics, do often. And there's, I think, an unfortunate tendency of science, people who identify themselves as skeptics, to want to minimize all of the fear around different toxins. And it seems to be popular among that crew to want to prove that all of these toxins are actually really safe and totally harmless and, all that kind of stuff. And I don't know if you saw recently, there was like a TV show where some guy did a stunt where he drank a thing of glyphosate to prove how safe it was. And
wow.
One of the things that the way that they make arguments often is based on the LD50
right.
substance. And so they say, the LD50 of glyphosate is this much, and here it's this much for caffeine, and it's this much for table salt, and it's this much for water, and for whatever else. Therefore, glyphosate is just as safe as table salt and water.
Right.
And I think that argument is just so deeply flawed, because
Huge.
LD50 is one thing, the amount of substance it takes to kill you.
Half the people.
And then the amount of substance it takes to start disrupting some important hormones and physiology that can result in some pretty nasty symptoms is a whole other thing.
Yeah, no, I know you don't want to digress. I just put in, I can't even tell you how many hours went into this, but I did an 8-hour presentation for health practitioners on this topic. I hate the topic, but of detoxification. And I will tell you that they don't have this. They use the LD50 acutely, right? Mm-hmm. What's the LD50 of that over 20 years.
That's a good point.
How many people would die from exposure to a certain dose of that over 20 or 30 or 40 years?
Yeah.
That's still an LD50 if they're dying from it. It's just not right now. He doesn't drink it and keel over.
Right.
Well, that's different, man.
Yeah.
And there's plenty of studies that suggest, first of all, that a synergistic effect between multiple things at a lower dose is damaging. Two is that there's a latent effect of these things, that and in fact, in the world of toxicology, the big phrase is the dose makes the poison.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what the skeptics will say. They'll say, well, water is toxic if you drink enough of it because you'll die from it. Well, great argument. But that there's evidence in studies that there's a latency effect, that you can get exposed today and literally not exhibit symptoms for much, much, much later. Just to give you one, there was a published case study of a woman, a scientist in a lab, that was exposed to a fairly high dose of mercury, didn't exhibit symptoms, and the study, I want to say it was like at least 180 days later, or 256 days later, something like that. But then all of a sudden, hundreds of days later, started having symptoms of mercury poisoning. But she had this like months and months and months before. Wow. And the researcher said, maybe the dose doesn't make the poison, that it actually has to do with this latency effect. And the other thing I want to say is, and you can look into this later for interest of time, this blew my mind when I read about it. It's very new, and it's called the non-monotonic dose response. In short, what the studies on the non-monotonic dose response suggests, and this dude blew my mind, is that low doses of a given chemical are literally just as physiologically damaging and toxic as high doses. Wow. And it's brand new. And the studies, again, in the interest of time, we can't get into this, but the studies on this and they're all new, man, like 2012 and above, basically say that in the world of toxicology, we thought that this might happen, but we didn't really believe it. Now, not only is it plausible, but it's likely happening. And wow. the class of toxins that this happens to be occurring in, and they say this, is in the endocrine disruptors. It doesn't seem to be with heavy metals. It doesn't seem to be with a number of different other drugs, but or toxins, but specifically endocrine disruptors. And you should see these curves. They use it an S-shaped curve to come up with what they call the non-observable adverse effect level. And then there's this sort of S curve, and it gets more and more toxic. But what they found is that it's a U, and that low doses just as physiologically damaging as high doses. And this is brand new. I don't get my mind blown very often, but I read this and I was like, holy cow, this is a game changer, dude. Yeah. And the dose doesn't make the poison. Anybody that says that is at this point, because the studies are out there, is just ignorant.
Wow. That's crazy.
It's horrible.
Yeah. Okay. So far we got low cortisol is real. The main area we've talked about so far is functional adrenal insufficiency. Yep. Things like mitochondrial dysfunction, endoplasmic reticulum stress, and toxins, nutrient deficiencies. So that's one. What's the other big thing that's going on?
Well, I saved the other one for last because I actually think this is what's going on more often. Now, like I said, it could be the functional adrenal insufficiency. It could be this one, which I'll mention, or it could be a combination, quite honestly. But this other one is what I'll just loosely call adrenal suppression or adrenal inhibition, which is essentially the same thing. Mm-hmm. And this is the body intentionally telling, if you will, the adrenal glands not to produce or release cortisol, saying, we don't want cortisol right now. I know you can make it if you want to. I know you're still super strong and potent enough to make cortisol, but right now we actually want low cortisol, which is, it may sound strange, but it's the body. The body does that all the time. If you get a fever, the body sequesters iron. It says, listen, if you have any iron floating around, let's get rid of that, because if the microbe that's infecting you right now has iron, it will be able to proliferate and replicate better. So let's get rid of all the iron. It intentionally lowers your iron availability. Wow. just to starve, if you will, the microbe.
Mm-hmm.
I personally believe that it has the ability to suppress vitamin D. So maybe that's the reason why we're seeing all this low vitamin D. So it's not uncommon for the body to inhibit. If you go into a hypocaloric state, if somebody's dieting for a competition, for example, it suppresses thyroid on purpose. You're not eating as much. Let's slow down the metabolic rate so that you don't burn up too fast.
Yeah.
It does these things intentionally all the time. So why is it so strange that the body would, in certain circumstances, intentionally want low cortisol? So and I will tell you that in my personal experience, I think that is a more common cause of low cortisol than is the other one that we talked about, though that's entirely possible. It's just super hard to measure. Gotcha. But this adrenal suppression or adrenal inhibition, the body intentionally is suppressing the adrenal glands from producing cortisol.
Okay, awesome. So you mentioned one potential reason for that, which is a chronic infection of some kind, or where the body's trying to sequester iron, for example.
No, that was a separate example. But infection will do that, though. And regarding the adrenal glands, yes, the infection is probably one of the most, well, I'll just say this, immune-related stuff. So infection of a variety of different types, low-grade chronic inflammation, that a number of what are called cytokines, which are simply immune system molecules, are released that literally suppress cortisol production. I mean, they have been shown to be potent suppressors of cortisol. Things like tumor necrosis factor alpha, and over time, interleukin-6, and there are these things released by neutrophils called defensins, which you can kind of figure out what they do. But it's from an immune cell, and one of the things it does is it suppresses cortisol. Transforming growth factor beta is a major suppressor of cortisol. And so these are all immune molecules.
All of those kind of lumped together with inflammation
and infection
or infections.
Yeah, those are two separate things. You can be infected and not inflamed. You can be inflamed and not infected to some degree. And the other one also has to do with infection. It's kind of a long word, abbreviated as LPS, but lipopolysaccharides. Yeah. Lipopolysaccharides, where our exposure would come from with that would be unfriendly bacteria, we'll call them, in the gut. So
gut dysbiosis.
You can call it dysbiosis. Certain bacteria, typically the gram-negative bacteria, they produce toxins, and it's considered to be an endogenously produced toxin because it's something within you that's making it. But if they make it and you have what's called intestinal permeability or leaky gut, then these lipopolysaccharides or LPS can go systemic into your body, and lipopolysaccharides are a potent inhibitor of cortisol chronically. And here's I'll just give the quick caveat to this. Most of the studies looking at these things look at it acutely. Interleukin-6 actually increases cortisol levels acutely. That's the difference. Lipopolysaccharides increase cortisol levels acutely, but none of us are going to get an acute dose of lipopolysaccharides. We either have dysbiosis and leaky gut, and therefore have this leak of chronic lipopolysaccharides into our system, or we don't have it at all. We don't have like, wham, here's an injection of lipopolysaccharides. Yeah. It doesn't happen that way.
Outside of acute food poisoning.
Well, yeah, possibly. Yeah, possibly. Or if you're a subject of a laboratory experiment when they injected you with lipopolysaccharides. But no. But lipopolysaccharides acutely increase cortisol production, but chronically suppress it. Mm-hmm. And so that's another one. So somebody could have dysbiosis with intestinal permeability, circulating lipopolysaccharides, and that's causing a blunted cortisol response.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you what, lipopolysaccharides, infection, inflammation, that's not adrenal fatigue. In addition to the fact that you can go straight from normal, to go back to Hans Selye, you could have normal cortisol and have an infection of some kind and go straight to low cortisol. Done. There's no alarm phase, resistance phase, exhaustion. You went straight from normal to quote unquote exhaustion. And it has nothing to do with this chronic stress, and you're stressed, and you could be stressed, have high cortisol, and stay stressed for life and have high cortisol. That you just have this really efficient system. So, that Hans Selye, that's why it's wrong. You can go straight into low cortisol just by getting an infection.
Interesting. Okay, so inflammation, infections, LPS, and then that LPS kind of goes along with leaky gut and gut dysbiosis.
Well, it's present with dysbiosis, and will only go systemic if you have intestinal permeability. Otherwise, it just stays in the gastrointestinal tract by and large.
Gotcha. And is that? Do you think does leaky gut commonly go with dysbiosis?
Yeah, well, yes. The studies are pretty clear on that too, that if a real quick way to intestinal permeability is some kind of infection in the first place. It's not the only way. Like dehydration while exercising supposedly causes it. There's a variety of things that does. But yes, infection is considered to be a quick way to intestinal permeability. Okay.
And real quick on the subject of infections, more and more I'm seeing people talk about chronic infections or hidden infections, things like that. What's your take on that? Is this a common thing? Do you think that there's quote unquote hidden infections?
Well, I don't know. I think the concept of a hidden infection is sexy. I mean, that's of course like, ooh, this stealth infection that we have to find. And it also kind of lets us off the hook, because if we can't find it but say it's there, then we can treat, I don't know. So, but that said, viral infections, I mean, when you say hidden infections, I typically think of the Lyme community and some of the co-infections that occur with Lyme that are really hard to identify. But viruses, which are not sexy, were like the original stealth organism. When you think about it, that these things are so old. They don't even have a cell wall themselves to protect themselves. They have to infect a host, a cell, and replicate within that cell until that cell dies. And like cockroaches, they all scurry to somewhere else. Anybody that's had chickenpox has a stealth infection, if that makes sense. And some people it will manifest as shingles, and other people it will stay stealth all the time. And the people that it develops into shingles are the people that have usually some kind of stress response, and it's so insane that their immune system gets so suppressed that it can no longer keep that particular infection at bay. So I like your question. I personally think that there's quite a few people that have a chronic infection of some kind. Now, I'm not going to say it's a stealth infection or a hidden infection, but it's definitely some kind of, usually a chronic viral infection. And I'll tell you part of the reason why I say this is the number of people today that we run a blood chemistry on that has a you know what? One of my kids is knocking on the door, man, and it's totally driving me out. So hold on.
Yeah.
Who is it? No, sweetheart, you have to go upstairs, love. Okay. I'm still on a call. Good Lord. It was like for 5 minutes, nonstop knocking. I could not shake that out of my head. I'm so sorry. I tried for so long.
I'm glad you took care of it, so it's not.
Gosh, poor thing. She's 3. She's beautiful. But I couldn't shake it.
Yeah.
Anyways, so so on our blood chemistry panel, the number of people today that have low normal white blood cells, which is typically a marker. The way that we use that most often is that there's some chronic insult to the immune system. And it could be autoimmune condition, which could be argued it's a chronic insult. It could be a chronic infection of some kind, which is a chronic insult. And that the immune system just is not, it just lacks the robustness, that it's sort of losing this long-standing fight. I can tell you that out of 10 average patients, probably 5 or 6 have low normal white blood cells. So we don't test for all these different, hidden or stealth infections. But the question is why are white blood cells low in so many people today? And I would not be surprised if there's viral infections that are, I don't want to call them hidden, but latent. They're the immune system, like I mentioned with chickenpox and shingles, viruses can exist inside of us, but our immune system can keep it at bay so that it doesn't go wild. But then the question is at what point, is there a point between chicken pox and full-blown shingles where it doesn't manifest as shingles, but it still is impacting the body and therefore maybe cortisol, if that makes sense?
Yeah.
So we don't get full-blown viral infections or the manifestations of them, but it's rearing its head enough to cause low cortisol. So to answer your question in a long-winded way, is I do think there's a lot of what I'll call subclinical, chronic, low-grade infections that are occurring in people and that very often are leading to low cortisol.
Gotcha. Okay, so is there anything else that you want to lump into the category of adrenal inhibition?
That's the big one, is that it's being inhibited. That the body, and when I say inhibition, the body is intentionally suppressing its ability to synthesize and release cortisol. It wants cortisol to be low. I don't want to freak people out, but cancer would be a great example of this too, that certain things are going on immunologically with cancer that the body would likely want low cortisol. Same thing with viral infections. Same thing if you get a fever. If someone gets a fever and wants to run an adrenal panel, I'd be willing to bet that when you're in the heat of that fever, that you will have low cortisol, because the immune system wants you to have low cortisol so that it can stimulate certain cells and inhibit other ones. So no, those are the main ones. Just an infection, inflammation of some kind, chronic inflammation, lipopolysaccharides, dysbiosis. Those would be the main things inhibiting.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay, so we got these two causes. Adrenal inhibition, you said you think is the more common one, or the more.
I think, yeah, as far as I can tell.
But at the same time, I mean, given what you talked about with different exposures of toxins and how they disrupt, how they're endocrine disruptors, and how common exposure to those things are, as well as how common nutrient deficiencies are. I mean, I would have to imagine that those are players, at least in the background, for almost everything.
I don't think it doesn't help. I don't know. How my suspicion is somebody would have to be pretty nutrient deficient to cause low cortisol, to put it another way.
Okay.
But are there people that have low cortisol due to inhibition that have a subclinical nutrient deficiency that it's contributing to it, but they would not have low cortisol if that was the only reason. So I think those are contributors more than causative factors. I think that the toxin issue, again, I think it'd have to be a fairly significant toxic exposure to cause clinically low cortisol.
Gotcha.
But in somebody where it's suppressed, I would guess that it's an additive effect. I think that it's contributing to it.
Okay. So let's, just as a thought experiment, let's say you take somebody and you subject them to chronic low dose LPS exposure. You know, they have gut dysbiosis and leaky gut, and so they're chronically getting this LPS leaking into the bloodstream. And then maybe they also have some kind of hidden infection suppressing cortisol. And just those two causes alone, or even one of those alone, if that's inhibiting cortisol production and lowering cortisol level, is that enough to explain all of the symptoms that we see in adrenal fatigue?
Yeah.
Okay. So just having that low cortisol will result in all of those symptoms we see that people commonly associated with adrenal fatigue.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. In fact, I'll tell you, there was one study, and I don't have any of these things in front of me. There was a study, I forget how many subjects were in it. I forget the title of it, and I forget the journal at the moment, although I could send it to you after we're done. Basically, oh gosh, I wish I could remember it. It was something along the line. It looked at people that had mood disorders, and it said it was PTSD, depression, and there was another one involved. But basically, what they did was they said all these neurological mood-based conditions. Is it low cortisol in the first place? So what they did was they looked at cortisol levels in all these patients, and it was low. And what they did was they gave hydrocortisone, which is synthetic pharmaceutical cortisol. And I forget how many people improved, but you understand this. They said it reversed PTSD, which means that's code for cure.
Wow.
I mean, they can't say it,
Right.
but they reversed PTSD. They reversed depression. They reversed these mood disorders. And when they identified low cortisol and they gave synthetic cortisone, which is their way of doing it, and that's fine. I think we'd like to try to correct it.
Yeah.
And they gave it, and the majority of the people in the study, their symptoms improved, and some of them even were cured, is basically what they said.
Wow.
And they went on to say that perhaps in the psychiatric industry, we shouldn't be moving to drugs first, but instead, because of the prevalence of low cortisol with mood disorders and the fact that we can treat low cortisol and correct these mood disorders, maybe we shouldn't be giving these things like Prozac and mood drugs first. So when you ask, are these associated with low cortisol? Absolutely. Depression, mood disorders, anxiety, low blood sugar symptoms, can't sleep. There's an association with cortisol and melatonin and substance P. They have increased pain perception, man. Like, just because of low cortisol. It's very real symptoms, and it is because of low cortisol.
Yeah, gotcha. Wow, powerful stuff. Okay, so so we got all the paradigm here now of what's really going on, what's the real physiology behind a lot of these symptoms that people commonly associate with adrenal fatigue. Can you take me through a couple practical examples of
Sure.
what this would look like as far as a treatment plan, and understanding that, of course, you're going to do diagnostic tests and you're going to figure out what's probably going on in that specific individual before you start attacking a treatment strategy, but maybe just give a couple typical cases and what are the layers of strategies that you address, and maybe the order that you go about doing things.
Wow, that's actually a bigger question. What I can tell you, I'll answer the question simply, first of all, that in somebody that has low cortisol that's been identified by a lab, one of the things that I've found to be most effective is giving botanicals or herbal compounds that are typically the kinds that you would take when you're getting sick. So like echinacea, golden seal, any of the medicinal mushrooms, maitake, shiitake, reishi, those kind of things. Lemon balm, or what's also known as Melissa officinalis. And this is an interesting one, is licorice root, which is historically been used for low cortisol in the first place.
Yeah.
One of its actions, it has many actions, but one has to wonder if this is why it's been so effective. Is one of its actions is it increases the half-life, or I should say decreases the half-life of cortisol. So the cortisol you have exists longer. It also is antiviral, which is interesting because that's a cause of low cortisol.
Yeah.
And it also tends to stimulate I wasn't going to get into this, but the Th1 side of it's a Th1 stimulating botanical, which is typically what you want. And so curiously, not only does it impact cortisol, it's more detailed. It's an aldosterone agonist, so it increases sodium absorption, water absorption, can increase somebody with low cortisol's blood pressure, and their blood pressure is typically really low. They usually get that orthostatic hypotension where they get lightheaded if they stand up too quickly, for example. And licorice root kind of combats that to some degree. At any rate, so if somebody has low cortisol, and they know that on a test, and that's all the information that they have, what I would consider trying is loading up with those types of botanicals: echinacea, golden seal, Oregon grape or mahonia, licorice root I mentioned. The mushrooms are good, usually in a tincture or extract form. Licorice root can be very good. If somebody truly has low cortisol, they're going to have low blood pressure too. Almost the big concern with licorice is that it's going to raise your blood pressure. But in a truly low cortisol person, they have low blood pressure.
Gotcha.
And those will tend to, I have seen those normalize cortisol without having to take any adaptogens, which are the botanicals that things like rhodiola and eleutherococcus and ashwagandha and all these ginseng's, all these things that are supposed to help like our body adapt. Which I did some research on these and how those adaptogens work. It's very interesting. They don't work on the adrenal glands, it turns out. But by those immune stimulating botanicals, I have seen cortisol regulate itself, normalize itself very, very quickly without taking any adrenal glandulars, any adaptogens, or any of those types of things. I think that's the most powerful and quickest thing that somebody could find.
Okay. And so medicinal mushrooms, lemon balm, licorice, echinacea, and golden seal. Was there anything else you want to lump into that?
Anything that supports the TH1 side of things. And somebody can go online and research TH1. It's either TH1 stimulating botanicals or TH2 inhibiting botanicals or compounds. Those are the same thing. Okay. And this is a popular topic right now. So you can go online and find some pretty long lists of some of these things. There are certain probiotics that will tend to stimulate one side of it or the other. I haven't used those very much with low cortisol cases, though I think it'd be really interesting to do. But basically that's the goal, is to try to stimulate the TH1 side of things as much as possible, and those mushrooms are good. Licorice root is fantastic. Echinacea, golden seal. Berberine is found in golden seal as well as Oregon grape or Mahonia, so berberine seems to be effective, but yeah.
Okay, gotcha. So as far you mentioned, actually I want to digress for a minute. You mentioned something about the adaptogens, that they don't really work on the adrenal glands. How do they work?
There's just, listen, and it was one study. It wasn't the best done study, but it was really interesting. They were suggesting that adaptogens allowed the other cells to respond to cortisol better, was basically what it was. So it may not actually impact cortisol levels, because adaptogens historically were used to help us adapt to stress, which when we didn't have lab testing, which made us feel better, right? So, and there's this whole thing of cortisol receptor resistance, which is, you've heard of insulin resistance, that's a whole other thing too. So these adaptogens were used for, millennia to try to help us adapt to stressful times. And it would make people symptomatically feel better, but there wasn't any lab tests to prove. And I have not seen adaptogens help improve cortisol levels on lab tests. I haven't. If there's practitioners that have, I'd love to see that. And I'm not questioning them, but I'm saying I just haven't seen that very much. But interestingly is perhaps, and this would make sense, maybe adaptogens don't impact the adrenal glands, but allow our other cells to respond to cortisol more normally, and therefore we feel like we're responding better. So all the original work, they didn't have lab tests to say adaptogens raise or lower cortisol. They help us adapt to stress, whether it was a lot of stress or too little stress, or we had a hyper or hypo stress response. It was said that they helped, but maybe that's the mechanism. It's actually helping all the other cells of the body respond to stress and or cortisol and or epinephrine better. Very, very fascinating kind of 180, but interesting stuff. Interesting.
Okay, so first thing that you might typically do with someone is that group of botanicals, and you said you've seen that normalized
in a month. I've seen cortisol go from tanked to completely normal rhythm, the cortisol rhythm.
Wow. Okay, so what might let's say that in that person that you did that with, they still have symptoms, maybe their cortisol hasn't normalized yet, and they still kind of feel, what they call adrenal fatigue, and, they're feeling some of those symptoms. What might a next step or two?
Fantastic question. Here's the thing, is I would highly recommend lab testing. So, and here's a great example. Let's say somebody had low cortisol. They took some immune enhancing botanicals, and their next cortisol came back as normal, but they still had those symptoms. So then what that's saying is that those symptoms are probably not related to their cortisol levels. If their cortisol came up and it's now normal, then all those symptoms, it didn't have to do with low cortisol. And then it's something else entirely. Maybe it's low thyroid. Low thyroid and low cortisol have many same symptoms, not all, but many. Mm-hmm. Different hormonal imbalances can. Like I said, different types of infections. So like Candida has many of the same symptoms as low cortisol, brain fog and fatigue, and you can get some achiness associated with that. So at that point, you just want to look at food sensitivities, quite honestly. Food sensitivities can have many of the same symptoms as low cortisol as well. So, ultimately, and I know you already know this, you need to take a sort of a real wide angle lens with this person. You don't just want to only look at cortisol levels and only treat cortisol levels. And rarely do we, in fact. We usually start with a blood chemistry test to look at blood sugar, thyroid, and all the things you can find on a blood chemistry test. But then you just start you have to look for something else. So if their cortisol levels are normal, but they still have symptoms, something else is going on that you haven't yet found. It could be food sensitivities or candida, like I said, or thyroid, or a number of different things. If they take those things and their cortisol doesn't come back up, then honestly, from the research that I've done, it's either suppression or functional adrenal insufficiency. So then you really do need to consider that maybe they have massive amounts of oxidative stress, or maybe, I will tell you at some point, and a medical doctor may need to get involved for this, although people can find places to run this on their own, is to run a hormone called ACTH, or adrenocorticotropic releasing hormone. Adrenocorticotropic hormone. ACTH, without getting into the details, is a pituitary hormone that tells the adrenal glands to release cortisol. If you were to run ACTH, it can tell you if the problem is in the adrenal glands or if the problem is higher up. So just to paint a real quick picture, if someone has low cortisol and they have normal or high ACTH, then that suggests the problem is in the adrenal glands. That the body is saying, please make more cortisol, and the adrenal glands are saying no for some reason. And either the botanicals that you gave weren't enough to overcome the immune system, or there's, like I said, excess oxidative stress or mitochondrial dysfunction that's higher order. So then the dysfunction is in the adrenal gland. On the other hand, if you have somebody that has low cortisol and low normal or low ACTH, then what this is saying is their adrenal glands are not producing cortisol because they're not being told to. The adrenal glands aren't doing it, but the whole body is not even trying to do it if ACTH is low. And now you're looking at something higher up in the pituitary, in the hypothalamus, in the brain, something. And that's a bigger issue, quite honestly. And one that an endocrinologist might be able to walk somebody through at that point. But if somebody has long-standing low cortisol that's not being resolved in anything, I would suggest getting ACTH run, because that will tell you if it's the adrenal gland that's causing the problem or if it's something else. And if it's something else, it's a whole other bag. Okay.
At what point would you start considering the possibility that it's functional adrenal insufficiency, and maybe it's a result of toxin exposure? And
that's a great question. So that's a really good question. There are some decent labs right now that look at toxin exposures, and I don't want to get it too deeply into that. Of these panels that are looking at toxin exposure, if they come back as positive, they're positive. You have exposure to those chemicals. If they come back as negative, it means nothing. And that's because, and there's some pretty awesome studies on this, that's because if there is, well, I'll put it this way. People have tested negative in urine for a chemical, in stool, and in blood, but positive in sweat. This is the same person.
Interesting.
So, and that speaks to its storage and how it's not being liberated unless the body's asking it to via sweat, for example. When the body heats up, you get some lipolysis and it gets liberated and then it gets excreted. But there's a couple studies that they took about 20 people, and they didn't have, it was negative in urine, blood, and stool, but positive in sweat. And so, to say it again, if somebody runs one of these tests that are usually urine, there's stool, there's urine or blood based, if they come back negative, that doesn't mean you don't have exposure to that chemical. Gotcha. So the long answer to your question is additional testing could be very helpful. The short answer I will tell you is, if you see a good practitioner in general, they're going to be working on you in nutrient sufficiency. They're going to have you follow, they're going to be paying attention to your diet and having you eat a good diet, probably taking some kind of multivitamin and dealing with possible nutrient insufficiencies. They're probably going to be addressing excess free radicals and oxidative stress just as a consequence of their program that they're putting you on. Hopefully, if they're a good practitioner, if that makes sense.
And just not to digress, but can you mention a couple strategies that you mean as far as addressing oxidative stress?
Nutrient sufficiency will combat oxidative stress by itself, as well as antioxidants. And I don't mean supplemental. If somebody is not following a decent diet, following a good diet will combat their oxidative stress, their nutrient insufficiencies, which both kind of work on each other.
Gotcha.
A good program is going to have somebody exercising and therefore sweating and therefore probably getting rid of some of their toxic load. A good practitioner is probably going to talk to the patient and say, listen, toxins are horrible. You need to clean up your life. You need to, stop using the same cosmetics that you've been using, toiletries, cleaning products, and some of those types of things. So to answer your question, a good practitioner is going to be addressing those things indirectly no matter what. Just because of, you cannot be healthy if you have exposure to toxins. You cannot be healthy if you have nutrient insufficiencies. So a good program is going to say, Mr. or Mrs. Patient, here's all the things that you need to be doing to address that's only going to serve to help whatever your signs and symptoms are, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So the only caveat to that is one could run a panel for oxidative stress, and one could run a panel for toxic exposure if they really wanted some quote unquote, hard data, black and white, on if they had issues with these things or not. Yeah. That said, neither of those tests are perfect. That you can have oxidative stress that won't show up on a quote unquote oxidative stress panel. But they're good. They're not perfect. But the short answer is a good practitioner is going to be, they have you on a good program for a good solid 3 months. That's going to indirectly address all those things anyways. So it should be a non-issue.
Gotcha. Okay. So is there any other strategy that you feel you might commonly take with people dealing with adrenal fatigue type symptoms? Like, so we went over, some of the botanicals, we went over potentially toxins and addressing some of those and oxidative stress, mainly via diet. By the way, actually on that note real quick, would you recommend saunas?
Yeah, I have no problem with that.
Okay.
Yeah, I love saunas. I absolutely love it. I just supercharged our sauna about a week ago. We have a far infrared sauna, and I added these near infrared heat lamps on the door. Oh my God, it's freaking.
You added it through the glass door?
Well, it's attached to the glass door. So glass door closes, so you have these 4 heat bulbs right in front of you on the far. It's my wife hates it. It's insane.
It's inside of the sauna? The heat
inside the sauna, yeah.
Oh, nice. Dude,
it's the best experience. I love it.
I want to do that. I just can't figure out how to get a wire in there without damaging the wood on the sauna.
It went right underneath where the door closes. It's just I got a lamp cord. I put it all together myself, but I just got a lamp cord, and the door, it goes underneath and the door closes over it. No problem. I mean, I don't know what your door setup is, but
okay. I'll have to.
Oh, dude, I can't even tell you.
That for a while.
It's like night and day.
Nice.
Oh my God, it's fantastic. Anyways, yeah, I don't have, here's the beauty about exercise and about sauna is under the care of a practitioner, they can kind of walk you through. Your body will tell you when you've had enough.
Yeah.
So, people can say globally, oh, well, people with low cortisol, they shouldn't sauna. You can't say that. They might be able to do 130 degrees for 5 minutes, but it's something. And it's like with exercise. You don't have somebody go and do CrossFit. You might have them, if they do nothing, maybe just start walk for 5 minutes or a treadmill or do a few body weight squats or something and then work their way up. Yeah. So to say globally that people with adrenal fatigue can't do certain exercise or shouldn't sauna is not true at all. Yeah. And in fact, they can, and I would suggest it's good, but they just need to do it judiciously and as their body sort of dictates.
Yeah, I completely agree. And on a side note, I think actually the avoidance of hormetic stressors like heat exposure, like exercise, is actually crippling to people over time if they can really avoid those things.
Totally agree.
Yeah. So I was trying to ask, and then I kind of sidetracked myself, but is there any other strategy or two that you think might be worth mentioning here as common things that a lot of people benefit from?
This is going to sound out there. It has to do, and I can't even put it in a nice little package. It has to do with loving yourself, life, feeling connected, your purpose in life. I'll say that.
It's not that out there. I actually have a section in the
yeah, no, it's. I mean, compared to what we're talking about, the physiology and biochemistry of adrenal issues.
Yeah, I'm the same way, where I'm like such a science guy, and then I want to avoid some of the woo-woo stuff.
No, it's not woo-woo. No, there's science on this now. I mean,
yeah.
just to quickly state, there's some really interesting research about the means with which we pursue happiness, and to pursue, and there's a lot of ways, but the studies talked about two different types. So there's eudaimonic and hedonic types of forms of looking for happiness. Hedonic, as the name would suggest, is deriving a sense of happiness or fulfillment through your own means for yourself. So you buy a new pair of shoes, you buy an electric guitar off eBay, and you're like, man, I rock, I'm awesome, I'm happy now. Whereas eudaimonic is you derive a sense of happiness and fulfillment by helping a greater cause, helping other people. So like helping somebody cross the street, or, belonging to a nonprofit organization, which is interesting because, you could write a book. Writing a book isn't either hedonic or eudaimonic. It's the intention behind it. You could write a book to say, look how great I am. I've helped this many patients. I'm awesome. That's hedonic. You could write a book to try to, change the world. And it doesn't matter if you're the author or have your picture or your name on it at all. It's to try to, that's eudaimonic. Yeah. And it turns out, I won't get into all the details of it, but it turns out that our genes know which way we're living our life. That people who tend to live a hedonic life will tend to have a higher baseline inflammation and lower immune function towards certain like viral infections. Yeah. So less macrophage activity, less natural killer cell activity. People that live a eudaimonic life have higher natural killer cell. And natural killer cells, by the way, are anti-cancer, antiviral. So higher natural killer cell and lower baseline inflammation, just because of how you derive happiness in your life. Yeah. And so I say that's not woo-woo, man, because they've studied this stuff and it's in the literature. Yeah. So I would argue that of everything we've talked about is the biggest piece. Now,
oh wow.
Will being connected correct somebody's low cortisol? I have no idea. Will not being connected lead to low cortisol? I have no idea. It's not been studied, and nor can I put that together empirically in my patients. It's too difficult to do. But what I will say is that I think that's a huge piece. That do we have a purpose in life? Do we have meaning in our life? Do we mean something to someone else? Do we feel significant to ourselves or to others? Are we loved, or even at the very least, do we feel or experience love for somebody else? I don't know how that relates to low cortisol, but my suspicion is that there's something there.
Awesome. I love that you brought that up, because and that you said that it might be the biggest piece. So I think that's really, really cool.
What we believe changes our physiology.
Yeah.
There's studies on that too. I told you I don't get my mind blown very much. Just briefly, there was a study, you probably saw this. There was a woman, she blended up a vanilla shake, and she poured this vanilla shake into two made-up containers. Mm-hmm. One was called Sensi Shake, and the other one was called Indulgence.
Right, yeah. There were the exact same calories and fat content.
Yeah, and so the subjects were asked to, really look at the ingredients, look at how many calories, how many fat, how much carbohydrates, and then they judged the patients on two categories. One was subjective on satiety, like do you feel full or not, and it was this is the mind blower. It was the exact same shake. She poured it into one and poured it into another. One was one can, one was the other. They drank one, they're like, oh, I still feel hungry. They drank the same shake in a different full fat, full indulgence, high calorie drink, and they're like, oh, I feel good.
Yeah.
But then the killer though is they measured ghrelin, and a hormone.
Yeah.
The hormone was different. It's a hunger hormone, and it was different. They drank the same freaking shake.
Yeah.
But yet a hormone responded differently based on what they believed they were drinking. That blew my mind.
Yeah.
Blew my mind, man. What are the implications of that with the food that we eat, whether we think it's healthy or not, or it just blew my mind. So anyways, when I say it may be the most powerful influence, if we feel like we have a purpose in life, makes us less likely to get a viral infection, and viral infections can lower our cortisol, then yes, then this may be one of the most important features of it.
Awesome. Well, I've kept you on a little bit more than an hour. I feel like I could talk to you for 5 more hours because this has been a blast.
Sure.
But is there anything you want to leave people with? Is there any kind of one last summarizing thought maybe that you want to just leave people with, and then we'll close?
One is that I wish I had realized what time I was doing this, because my room is now pitch black.
Yeah.
It's 5:15 in Maryland, and with the time change, like, I wish I had complied with that. No, the only other thing is, that's a good question, that nobody knows what they're doing. None of us. That science doesn't prove anything. It disproves what we previously believed. That any practitioner out there is just doing the best that they can, given the knowledge that they have. Some have more knowledge and therefore may do a better job than others. But that, generally speaking, we're all just doing the best we can, but none of us knows what we're doing. And to the last piece, I truly, or at least right now, believe that, I don't know how to say it, but believing in a something bigger than yourself, having a true purpose in life, and I mean a purpose. I mean, why you're here, I think is one of the and I'll say this, add the last piece to that is our pursuit of health, if you really think about it, is not to be healthy. Yeah. When you think about it, it's what health brings. It brings happiness. It brings perhaps feeling sexy to somebody else. It brings having energy so that you can play with your kids. It brings the avoidance of the pain of, like, not being able to think fast or straight or something. So when people are constantly chasing this thing called health or wellness, that I want them to know that that's not what it is that you're after. You're not after health or wellness. You're after what those things bring, and to really evaluate those things in your life, because the pursuit of you never arrive at optimal health. You never arrive at optimal wellness, and if that's your goal, you'll be chasing it your whole life. So
awesome. Well, this has been so much fun. I want to bring you on again, and I want to keep doing this. I feel like I want to do a series with you, because this is just great. But I think we'll leave it at that for now, and thank you so much for the call, and I know everybody's going to love this.
Cool.
So, thank you.
It's my pleasure.
Yeah, enjoy the rest of your night.
Thanks.